What if the Tau successfully indoctrinated a Space Marine chapter? What if the ultimate defenders of humanity, the Emperor's own Space Marines, turned their backs on everything they stood for? Imagine a chapter, their genetic loyalty twisted, their faith shattered, now serving the greater good. This isn't just heresy. It's a terrifying possibility we're about to dissect, exploring the insidious Tau plot that could make it reality. The silence of the void carries secrets that would shatter worlds. In the eastern fringes of the Imperium, where the light of Terra dims to a distant flicker and the Astronomican's glow becomes little more than a half-remembered dream, there existed a chapter whose very name has been scrubbed from every record, purged from every data slate, burned from the lips of those who once spoke it in reverence. They were called the Crimson Phoenixes, sons of Guilliman through the genocide of his lineage, a chapter born in the fires of the 37th millennium to guard the frontier worlds against the encroaching darkness. They built their fortress monastery on Valador Prime, a world of crimson deserts and black stone mountains, where the wind howled with voices that sounded almost human. For 3,000 years they held that line, fought that war, bled into that endless sand. For 3,000 years they believed. And then they stopped. The fall of a Space Marine chapter does not happen in a single moment, in one catastrophic battle or one desperate choice. It happens in whispers. It happens in doubts that fester like infection in a wound left untreated. It happens when faith becomes routine, and routine becomes hollow. When the Emperor's distant throne seems less like divinity and more like absence. When the voices of Terra speak only in demands for tithes and censures for failures and silence in the face of pleas for reinforcement. The Crimson Phoenixes fought for centuries with no support, no recognition, no acknowledgement that they existed beyond the numbers they filed in their casualty reports. 12 worlds they defended, 43 campaigns they waged with depleted numbers and failing equipment. They watched their battle brothers die slowly, not in glorious combat, but from cascading organ failure because the Mechanicus shipments never arrived, from wounds that could have been saved if their apothecaries had the proper materials, from diseases that spread through their fleet because the Administratum had deemed their sector too remote to warrant the resources for proper sanitation protocols. Chapter Master Valdris Caney stood on the command deck of the battle barge Eternal Vigil and watched his chapter die by degrees. He was old, even by the standards of the Adeptus Astartes, his face a landscape of scar tissue and augmetic reconstruction, his eyes replaced centuries ago with crimson lenses that whirred and clicked when he focused. He had served for 642 years. He had killed orcs on Goral V, cut down Necrons in the tomb world of Cathara, held the line against a chaos incursion on the hive world of Malistrum that left 3 million dead and the entire planet under exterminatus order. He had done everything the Imperium demanded. He had given everything the Emperor required. And when he sent his requests for resupply, for reinforcements, for the basic necessities to keep his chapter combat capable, he received nothing but forms to fill out, protocols to follow, centuries-long queues to wait in while his warriors died for want of a bolt shell or a replacement power pack. The first contact came on a Thursday, if the ship's chronometer could be trusted in the warp-touch space of the Damocles Gulf. A transmission, clean and clear, cutting through the static of the Vox channels with a precision that spoke of technology far beyond what the Crimson Phoenixes possessed. No Imperial transmission had ever sounded like this. No human voice carried that particular cadence, that measured calm, that absence of the Gothic tongue's harsh edges. The voice spoke in perfect low Gothic, free of static, free of distortion, as clear as if the speaker stood on the bridge beside them. "Greetings, warriors of humanity. We observe your struggle. We acknowledge your sacrifice. We wonder if you have ever asked yourselves why you struggle alone." Caney should have cut the transmission immediately. He should have ordered a full sweep for XENOS infiltration, should have doubled the watch and initiated combat protocols. Instead, he stood in the red light of the command deck and listened. Something in that voice carried a weight of genuine curiosity, not the mocking laughter of chaos or the cold hunger of the alien predator, but actual question, as if the speaker truly wanted to know the answer. His hand hovered over the Vox cutoff switch. The silence stretched. Around him, his officers waited, their helmets turned toward him, their weapons ready but not raised. They were space marines, genetically conditioned to resist, psycho-indoctrinated to reject, hypno-trained to destroy anything that threatened their faith. Yet none of them moved to end the transmission. They stood in that red light, and they listened to the Xenos' voice, and the shame of that moment would later be remembered as the first crack in their fortress of loyalty. The speaker identified itself as Anvasha, a representative of the Tau Empire, a civilization the Crimson Phoenixes knew only through propaganda reels and inquisitorial warnings. The Xenos spoke of observation, of watching the chapter's campaigns, of noting their victories achieved despite impossible odds, their discipline maintained despite crushing losses, their honor upheld even when the Imperium they served showed them none in return. "We do not come to mock your faith," the voice said, and there was something in those words that felt worse than mockery, something that felt like pity. "We come to offer an alternative, a society where warriors are valued not for their genocide or their paperwork, but for their deeds, where resources flow to those who need them, not those who fill out the correct forms, where the strong protect the weak, not out of duty enforced by terror, but because it serves the greater collective good of all sentient beings." Caney killed the transmission then, his fist slamming down on the control panel, hard enough to crack the steel plating. The bridge fell silent, except for the humming of the cogitators and the distant rumble of the plasma drives. His officers waited. Outside the viewports, the void stretched endless and empty, and somewhere in that darkness, the Xenos watched and waited for a response that should never come. He ordered the communication logged and sealed, marked for review by the chapter's chaplains and librarians, subjected to every ritual of purification and analysis their limited resources could manage. Then he went to the chapel, and he prayed to the God Emperor of mankind, and his prayers felt like they went no further than the walls of that small chamber, echoing back to him empty and cold. The Tau did not contact them again for 3 months. In that time, the Crimson Phoenixes fought 2 engagements, lost 47 battle brothers, and received no resupply, no reinforcements, no acknowledgement from Terra or the Administratum or anyone in the vast bureaucratic machine of the Imperium that their requests even existed. The chapter's apothecaries began to ration their medical supplies, choosing which wounded could be saved and which would be granted the Emperor's peace, because the resources to heal them simply did not exist. The Tech Marines stripped equipment from the dead to keep the living's war gear functional. The fleet's navigators reported that the Astronomican's light was growing dimmer, harder to follow, as if Terra itself was turning its face away from them. When the second transmission came, Caney was in the chapter's armory, personally maintaining his power sword because the chapter's serfs were stretched too thin and the servitors were failing without proper maintenance. The blade was 3,000 years old, a relic from the chapter's founding, and it deserved better than to be left to rust in a decaying armory on a dying ship. The Vox bead in his ear crackled to life with that same clear, calm voice. "Chapter Master Caney, we observe that your situation has not improved. We observe that your loyalty remains unrewarded. We observe that your warriors continue to die, while the Imperium you serve continues its silence. We wonder if perhaps it is time to discuss alternatives." This time, Caney did not immediately cut the transmission. He stood in the armory, his hands on the blade of his sword, and he thought about the 47 names added to the chapter's memorial wall in the past 3 months. He thought about Brother Sergeant Kallax, who died of infection from a wound that should have been treatable if they had proper antibiotics. He thought about Tech Marine Vorin, killed when his failing power armor's reactor went critical because they lacked the parts to repair it properly. He thought about Scout Tiberius, barely 16 Terran years old, who suffocated in the void when his void suit's seals failed during a boarding action. He thought about the requests he had sent to Terra, to the Administratum, to the Mechanicus, to anyone who might listen. He thought about the silence that answered. "What alternatives?" he asked, and the words tasted like ash and betrayal and something worse, something that felt almost like hope. The indoctrination of a Space Marine chapter cannot be accomplished through force. The Adeptus Astartes are built to resist, their minds fortified by decades of hypnotic conditioning, their souls armored by unshakable faith, their bodies enhanced with organs that regulate their brain chemistry and prevent manipulation. You cannot simply capture a Space Marine and break him, cannot torture him into compliance or drug him into obedience. The 19 organs implanted in their bodies, the conditioning that begins in childhood, the psycho-indoctrination that layers loyalty upon loyalty until faith becomes synonymous with identity. All of this creates a warrior whose allegiance should be unbreakable. Should be. But the Tau had studied humanity for centuries, had fought the Imperium across 100 worlds, had captured and examined thousands of human prisoners, and they understood something that the Imperium itself seemed to have forgotten in its arrogance. Faith, no matter how strong, requires feeding. Loyalty, no matter how deep, requires reciprocation. And neglect, sustained over centuries, creates wounds that even genocide cannot heal. The Tau called it the path of enlightenment, a psychological process developed specifically for breaking down Imperial resistance among captured humans. It had been refined over generations, tested on millions of subjects, perfected to the point where entire planetary populations could be converted within a generation. But Space Marines were not ordinary humans. They were post-human, enhanced, indoctrinated beyond anything the Tau had previously encountered. The process would need to be adapted, made subtle, extended over years instead of months, focused not on breaking their faith but on redirecting it, not on destroying their loyalty but on making them question what that loyalty had earned them. The Tau were patient. They had time. And they had something the Imperium no longer provided. They had answers. The ethereal caste assigned to the project was named Aunroer, and he was old even by the standards of his kind, his skin bearing the pale blue of advanced age, his cranial implants showing the wear of centuries of use. He had converted 3 Imperial worlds personally, had studied human psychology for 200 years, had read every text on Space Marine doctrine that the Tau Empire possessed. He understood that to convert a Space Marine chapter, you could not attack their faith in the Emperor. That foundation was too deep, too central to their identity. Instead, you questioned their faith in the Imperium, in the institutions that claimed to serve the Emperor but seemed more interested in maintaining their own power. You showed them the difference between the divine ideal they believed in and the corrupt reality they actually served. You made them see that the Emperor they worshipped would be disgusted by the Imperium that bore his name. The first phase was gifts. Not bribes, not offers of wealth or power, but simple provision of basic necessities presented without conditions or demands. A shipment of medical supplies appeared in orbit around Valador Prime, accompanied only by a message explaining that the Tau had observed the chapter's medical crisis and wished to offer humanitarian aid in recognition of their service to their people. No strings, no contracts, just supplies. Caney ordered the shipment destroyed, of course. He had it towed into the system star and burned while the chapter's chaplains led prayers of purification. But he noted the manifest first. The shipment had contained everything the chapter needed: the right antibiotics, the correct blood substitutes, proper wound sealant, all catalogued with precision that showed genuine knowledge of Space Marine physiology. The Tau had done their research. They knew what was needed. They cared enough to offer it. The Imperium, in contrast, had sent nothing. 3 weeks later, another shipment arrived. This time, it contained replacement parts for power armor, common components that the chapter's tech marines had been cannibalizing from the dead to keep the living operational. Again, no demands. Again, no conditions. Just a message expressing regret that such noble warriors were forced to operate with failing equipment while defending their people. Again, Caney ordered it destroyed. Again, he noted that every component was exactly what they needed, properly blessed with Mechanicus prayers, compatible with their armor marks. Someone on the Tau side understood Imperial technology well enough to provide proper materials. Someone cared enough to send them. The third shipment contained ammunition. Bolt shells, each one properly consecrated, each one marked with prayers to the Emperor and the chapter's own litanies. That was when Caney realized how deep the Tau knowledge went. They had not just observed the chapter's equipment needs, they had studied their faith, learned their prayers, understood their rituals well enough to properly sanctify ammunition, according to Imperial rites. A XENOS civilization was showing more respect for the chapter's religious traditions than the Mechanicus had in the last century. Caney stood in the launch bay and looked at crates of bolt shells, each one bearing prayers written in High Gothic by Zeno's hands, and something in his chest felt like it was cracking. He did not destroy that shipment. He sealed it in the deepest vault of the fortress monastery, and he did not speak of it to anyone, and at night he lay in his Spartan cell, and he thought about those prayers written in perfect Gothic by Xenos, who had never seen Terra, who had never heard the Imperial creed, who nevertheless understood his faith well enough to honor it. He thought about the administratum clerks who had processed his supply requests with such obvious contempt, who had demanded he submit his needs using forms that no longer existed, who had told him that his chapter's suffering was simply the cost of defending the Imperium. He thought about the Mechanicus Magi, who had refused to send aid because the Crimson Phoenixes lacked the political influence to make their requests matter. He thought about the ecclesiarchy preachers who had visited the chapter once, delivered sermons about duty and sacrifice, then left on the next ship without offering any material support. The Tau spoke to him again 6 months later. By then, the chapter had lost 92 more battle brothers, fought 4 more campaigns with no support, watched their equipment degrade further, their supplies dwindle closer to nothing. The voice came through the vox clear and calm as always. Chapter Master Kane, we observe your continued loyalty to an institution that shows you none in return. We observe your faith in an ideal that your own leadership has abandoned. We wish to ask you a question, not as enemies, but as one warrior to another. When you look at your fallen brothers, when you read their names on your memorial walls, do you mourn their deaths in service to the Emperor, or do you mourn their waste in service to bureaucrats who never knew their names? Caney sat in his command throne, and he had no answer, because the truth was too terrible to speak aloud. He mourned the waste. Emperor forgive him, but he mourned the waste. Brother Sergeant Calix had not died in glorious combat serving the God Emperor of mankind. He had died of infection because a clerk on some distant world had misfiled a supply request. That was not martyrdom. That was not sacrifice. That was murder by negligence, and the murderers wore the Imperial Aquila on their chests. "We do not ask you to abandon your faith," Onroyer continued, and for the first time Caney heard genuine compassion in that Xenos voice. "We do not ask you to betray the Emperor you serve. We ask only that you consider whether the Imperium you defend still serves that Emperor's will, or whether it has become something he would not recognize, something he might even oppose if he could see what it has become. We ask you to consider whether warriors of your caliber might serve humanity better by serving the greater good rather than the lesser evil of a decaying institution that treats you as expendable resources." The conversation lasted 3 hours. Caney told himself he was gathering intelligence, learning about the enemy, understanding their tactics. But the truth was simpler and more damning. He was listening because someone was finally acknowledging his chapter's sacrifice. Someone was finally treating his warriors as people rather than numbers on a casualty report. Someone was finally suggesting that their lives had value beyond their utility to the Imperial war machine. The Tau spoke of their society, of their caste system that valued each citizen according to their contribution, of their technology freely shared among all who served the greater good, of their expansion driven not by conquest, but by offering better alternatives to populations suffering under Imperial or Orc or other Xenos rule. They spoke of space marines they had encountered, of the respect they held for such warriors, of the tragedy they saw in watching such nobility wasted by an empire that deserved none of their loyalty. "We have observed your chapter for 5 years, Onroyer said, as the conversation wound toward its close. "We have watched you fight with honor against impossible odds. We have noted your discipline, your skill, your unwavering dedication to protecting the weak. These are qualities the Tauva, the greater good, was designed to protect and encourage. Your emperor, if he truly is the god you believe him to be, would want his warriors serving the cause of the greater good, not the cause of petty bureaucrats and corrupt officials. We do not ask you to renounce him. We ask you to consider that serving humanity might require leaving the Imperium that has abandoned humanity's ideals. Caney ended the transmission and sat in darkness for hours, his enhanced physiology keeping him awake and alert, while his mind churned through arguments and counter-arguments, heresies and truths, faith and facts. He was Chapter, Master of the Crimson Phoenixes, a son of Guilliman, a warrior of the Emperor. His loyalty was absolute, his faith was unshakable, and yet, sitting in that darkness, he found himself unable to counter a single thing the XENOS had said. The Imperium had abandoned his chapter. Terra was silent. The institutions that claimed to serve the Emperor's will had shown nothing but contempt for the warriors actually doing his work. If the Emperor was truly divine, truly all-knowing, truly the god the ecclesiarchy claimed him to be, would he want his sons dying uselessly while bureaucrats hoarded supplies and politicians played games with lives? The first crack had become a fissure. The fissure was becoming a chasm, and into that chasm the Tau poured their poison disguised as truth. The corruption of a Space Marine chapter proceeds in stages, each one carefully calibrated to exploit specific vulnerabilities while maintaining the illusion that the chapter is still making free choices. The Tau understood that direct confrontation would trigger rejection, that obvious manipulation would be recognized and resisted. Instead, they used the Imperium's own failures as weapons, highlighting contradictions, exposing hypocrisies, demonstrating through action rather than words that there was an alternative to the slow death the chapter was experiencing. The gifts continued, never demanding reciprocation, always perfectly tailored to the chapter's needs. Medical supplies arrived when disease spread through the fleet. Equipment appeared when armor failed. Ammunition materialized when stores ran low. Each time, the Tau message was the same. We see your struggle. We value your service. We offer aid because warriors of your caliber deserve support. Chapter Chaplain Mordecai was the first to openly question the situation. He came to Caney's chambers in the dead of the ship's night cycle, his skull-faced helm removed to reveal the scarred features beneath, his eyes haunted by doubts that would have once been unthinkable. Brother Captain, I have conducted every rite of purity on those supplies. I have subjected them to every test of corruption our librarians can perform. They are clean, not just clean of physical taint, but of spiritual corruption. There is no warp touch, no chaos influence, no hidden manipulation. The XENOS are providing us with genuinely sanctified materials, prepared according to proper Imperial rites, offered without taint or trap. I do not understand it. By all doctrine, this should be impossible. XENOS cannot perform sacred rites. They cannot properly sanctify equipment. They do not understand faith. And yet the evidence is undeniable. Caney looked at his chaplain and saw his own doubts reflected there. Mordecai was 300 years old, had served as chaplain for a century, had ministered to the chapter's spiritual needs through countless battles. His faith should have been absolute, unshakable, proof against any doubt. But faith required feeding, and the Imperium had starved them for too long. What are you suggesting, Mordecai? I suggest nothing, my lord. I report what I have observed. The XENOS respect our faith more than our own ecclesiarchy. They honor our traditions more than the Mechanicus. They value our lives more than the administratum. These facts disturb me greatly, because they force me to question whether we serve the Emperor or whether we serve the institutions that claim to speak for him, and I find myself uncertain of the answer. That conversation was the beginning of the end. Once the chapter's spiritual guardian admitted to doubt, the rest became inevitable. The other officers began speaking more openly about their frustrations, their anger at the Imperium's neglect, their growing sense that the Crimson Phoenixes had been abandoned to die slowly on the frontier, while Terra focused on more politically valuable chapters. The chaplains tried to maintain discipline, tried to reinforce loyalty through prayer and ritual, but their hearts were not in it. They had all seen the tow supplies. They had all noted the care with which each item was prepared, the respect shown to their traditions, the genuine concern for their welfare. And they had all contrasted it with the Imperium's calculated indifference. The Tau escalated carefully. They began broadcasting educational materials, not propaganda, but simple factual documentaries about their society, their technology, their expansion into the galaxy. They showed human populations living under Tau governance, prosperous and content, free from the grinding oppression of the Imperial system. They showed their military forces, emphasizing the honor with which they conducted warfare, the care they took to minimize civilian casualties, the mercy they showed even to captured enemies. They showed their technology, openly shared among all castes, advancing constantly because innovation was encouraged rather than suppressed as heresy. And most damningly, they showed their society's treatment of warriors, the respect and support provided to those who fought for the greater good, the resources freely given to military forces, because protecting the civilization was considered the highest priority. The contrast with the Imperial system was devastating. Space Marines were created to be the Emperor's finest warriors, genetically enhanced, psycho-indoctrinated, trained from childhood to be perfect soldiers. But the Imperium treated them as expendable resources, as numbers on a ledger, as tools to be used until broken then discarded without thought. The Tau, in contrast, treated their warriors as valued citizens, provided them with the best equipment available, supported them with comprehensive logistics, honored their service with genuine recognition. The message was subtle but clear. Warriors who served the greater good received the respect and support they deserved, while warriors who served the Imperium received neglect and eventual death. Caney authorized a formal meeting. He told himself it was reconnaissance, that understanding the enemy was essential to defeating them, that gathering intelligence on Tau psychology and tactics was his duty as chapter master. But the truth was simpler. He wanted to see for himself whether the XENOS could possibly be as sincere as they seemed, whether their society could actually function the way they claimed, whether there was truly an alternative to the slow, grinding death his chapter faced under Imperial rule. The Tau agreed immediately, suggesting a neutral location, a dead world on the border between Imperial and Tau space. They brought a single delegation, no weapons, no threats, just enroire and a handful of aides. The ethereal was smaller than Caney expected, barely reaching the chest of the towering space marine, his blue skin marked with the ritual scarification of his caste. But his presence was undeniable, a kind of charisma that seemed to fill the abandoned facility where they met. He greeted Caney with a bow that held genuine respect, his voice as calm in person as it had been over Vox. Chapter Master Caney, we are honored by your presence. We understand the risk you take in meeting with us. We understand the doubt you must feel. We wish only to show you that there is another way, that warriors of your caliber need not die forgotten and unremarked in service to an empire that has forgotten what service means. They talked for 12 hours. Caney brought his senior officers, his chaplains, his librarians, every warrior whose counsel he valued. The Tau brought philosophers, scientists, military strategists, and former Imperial humans who had defected to their cause. The humans were the most damning testimony, former Imperial Guard officers and Navy commanders who spoke of their time serving the Imperium and their reasons for leaving. They did not speak with the broken voices of the enslaved or the fevered tones of the corrupted. They spoke calmly, rationally, detailing the systematic failures of Imperial governance, the casual cruelty of its bureaucracy, the utter disregard for human life that characterized every level of its operation. One former Guard colonel described watching his regiment die of starvation because a supply ship had been diverted to a more politically important war zone, how he had requested aid and been told that the administratum considered his regiment's survival less important than maintaining production quotas on a factory world 3 sectors away. The Imperium does not value service, the colonel said, his weathered face grim. It values compliance. It does not honor warriors. It uses them. And when you are used up, when you have nothing left to give, it discards you without thought or mercy. The Tau do not promise paradise. They do not claim to offer a perfect society, but they offer something the Imperium never could. They offer recognition that your life has value beyond your utility, that your sacrifice deserves acknowledgement, that your service earns respect rather than contempt. They offer a society where the strong protect the weak because it is right, not because terror enforces it. Caney listened, and he found no counter-argument. Everything the man said matched his own experience, echoed his own growing doubts, confirmed suspicions he had been suppressing for decades. The Imperium had used his chapter, demanded everything, provided nothing, and would mourn not at all when they finally died. The God Emperor, if he was truly divine, if he truly cared for his warriors, would he approve of such treatment? Or would he, as the Tau suggested, be horrified by what his Imperium had become? The second meeting led to a third, then a fourth, each time with more of the chapter present, more warriors listening to the Tau's philosophy, more officers nodding at explanations that resonated with their experience. The Tau never demanded conversion. They never pressed for commitment. They simply presented their case, answered questions honestly, admitted the flaws in their own system while highlighting its strengths. And, crucially, they continued to provide support, to send supplies, to demonstrate through action that their words about valuing warriors were not empty promises. The chapter's librarians reported that the Tau projections of psychic phenomena were accurate, that they genuinely seemed to have limited connection to the warp, that their society functioned without the need for psychers or astropaths or the constant terror of demonic corruption. This was perhaps the most seductive aspect of the Tau's offer. The Imperium was drowning in psychic threats, the warp pressing closer every year, demons manifesting with increasing frequency, the constant fear of chaos corruption hanging over every action. The Tau offered a society functionally immune to the warp's influence, not through faith or sacrifice, but through the simple accident of their species' minimal psychic presence. For space marines who had fought demons, who had watched brothers fall to corruption, who had seen the warp's terrible power firsthand, the promise of a life without that constant existential threat was almost impossible to resist. Resistance within the chapter did exist. The older veterans, those who remembered the chapter's founding, those whose faith remained strong despite everything, they argued against even considering the Tau's offer. They cited the Imperial Creed, the chapter's oaths, the sacred duty owed to the God Emperor and to Terra. But their arguments rang hollow against the mounting evidence of Imperial neglect. When they spoke of duty, the younger warriors asked what duty the Imperium owed in return. When they invoked the Emperor's name, the chaplains asked whether the Emperor would truly want his sons dying uselessly in service to corrupt bureaucrats. When they cited chapter oaths, officers asked what those oaths were worth when the institution they had sworn to serve had broken its own promises of support. The breaking point came during a campaign on Hestria Setteven. The Crimson Phoenixes responded to a distress call from an Imperial hive city under Orc invasion. They deployed with less than 300 fully combat-capable battle brothers, their equipment failing, their supplies inadequate, their support non-existent. They fought for 47 days straight, holding the line against a Wah that should have required a full chapter strength to repel. They saved 8 million civilians, broke the Orc horde, drove the XENOS from the planet. And when the Astra Militarum arrived 3 weeks later to secure the planet, when the Administratum representatives began assessing the damage, when the ecclesiarchy preachers came to hold services celebrating the Emperor's victory, not one of them acknowledged the chapter's sacrifice. The Administratum clerks focused on property damage and lost industrial capacity. The ecclesiarchy preachers thanked the Emperor while ignoring the warriors who had actually bled for the victory. The Imperial governor of the planet never even met with chapter Master Caney, sending an aide to deliver perfunctory thanks and a request that the chapter leave as soon as possible, since their presence was unsettling to the civilian population. 300 warriors had held a planet. 92 of them had died doing it, and the Imperium's response was to ask them to leave because their presence was inconvenient. Caney stood in the ruins of the Hive City, and he watched Imperial functionaries ignore his wounded warriors, step over the bodies of the fallen, treat the chapter as a necessary evil rather than saviors, and he made his decision. The formal conversion took 6 months to complete, The Tau did not rush, did not pressure, did not demand immediate commitment. They worked with the chapter to develop a transitional framework that would preserve the Crimson Phoenix's identity and traditions while integrating them into the Tau Empire's command structure. They agreed that the chapter would maintain its Imperial faith, that worship of the Emperor would continue, that all chapter rituals and ceremonies would be preserved. The Tau's only requirement was that the chapter's loyalty transfer from the Imperium to the Taguva, that they fight for the greater good, rather than a distant throne world that had forgotten they existed. The theological implications were staggering. The chaplains struggled to reconcile Imperial faith with XENOS service, to find a framework that would allow them to maintain their beliefs while serving under alien command. They found their answer in an interpretation that the Imperium itself would consider the worst heresy. They argued that the Emperor, if he was truly divine, if he truly existed as a conscious being rather than a corpse on a throne, would want his warriors serving the cause of good wherever it was found. They argued that the Imperium had fallen from the Emperor's light, that the institutions bearing his name no longer served his will, that true faith required opposing the corruption that had taken his name in vain. They argued that serving the greater good was serving the Emperor's true purpose, that protecting the weak and fighting for a just society was more faithful to his vision than mindless obedience to bureaucrats who had long since abandoned any pretense of righteousness. It was heresy. It was apostasy. It was treason of the highest order. And it was also, in a twisted way, logical. If the Emperor truly was the god the Imperium claimed, truly was a being of compassion and justice and strength, would he want warriors of such caliber dying forgotten in service to corruption? Or would he want them serving any cause that genuinely protected humanity, regardless of what banner it flew under? The final ceremony was conducted in the chapter's chapel, with Enroyer present but silent, witnessing rather than participating. The Crimson Phoenixes gathered in full force, every battle brother present, every officer, every chaplain, every librarian. They wore their full armor, bore their weapons, maintained every tradition of a chapter assembled. And they swore new oaths, not to Terra, not to the Imperium, but to the greater good and to the Emperor, in whose name they would continue to fight. The theological gymnastics required to make this work would have horrified any inquisitor, but the logic was internally consistent. They served the Emperor by serving his true will, which was the protection and betterment of humanity, which the Tauva offered, and the Imperium no longer did. The Tau provided everything they had promised. New equipment arrived within weeks, proper supplies, reinforcements, in the form of Tau auxiliary forces trained to support space marine operations. The chapter's tech marines were given access to Tau technology, not to replace their sacred armor, but to repair and enhance it, to provide the maintenance materials that the Mechanicus had withheld. The wounded received proper medical treatment, the fleet underwent comprehensive repair, the fortress monastery on Valador Prime was restored and reinforced with Tau assistance. Within 6 months, the Crimson Phoenixes were combat effective again, their numbers stabilized, their equipment functional, their warriors no longer dying slowly from neglect, and they fought for the greater good. They deployed alongside Tau forces, protected Tau colonies, engaged Imperial forces when those forces threatened Tau expansion. They told themselves they fought to protect innocence, to spread a better system of governance, to serve the Emperor's true will rather than the Imperium's corruption. They told themselves they were not traitors. They told themselves they had made the right choice. The Imperium's response was swift and merciless. The Inquisition declared the Crimson Phoenixes Excommunicate Traitoris, damned as heretics and XENOS lovers, marked for destruction alongside any Chaos Warband or Renegade chapter. The decree was read across 1,000 worlds, the chapter's name struck from every record, their fortress monastery on their former homeworld bombarded from orbit until nothing remained but radioactive glass. An entire chapter, 3,000 years of service, uncounted battles fought in the Emperor's name, all erased as if they had never existed. The Imperium's gratitude for their service was obliteration. Its memory of their sacrifice was damnation. Its judgment was absolute and without mercy. The Crimson Phoenixes, now fighting under Tau command, heard the decree and felt nothing but vindication. This was what they had escaped, this casual erasure, this utter disregard for service rendered. The Imperium would rather see them destroyed than admit that its own failures had driven them away. It would rather condemn them as heretics than acknowledge that bureaucratic neglect had murdered them slowly for centuries. The Tau's assessment had been correct. The Imperium was an empire of cruelty, sustained by terror, maintained through oppression, utterly devoid of the nobility it claimed to represent. The first engagement between the Crimson Phoenixes and their former brothers came 8 months after their conversion. An Imperial strike force arrived to purge a Tau colony world, led by the Black Templars, a chapter known for fanatical loyalty and hatred of all things XENOS. The Black Templars expected orcs or Taufire warriors, maybe some human auxiliaries. They did not expect to face space marines, did not expect to encounter warriors who fought with Imperial tactics, who knew Imperial doctrine, who could predict their every move because they had been trained by the same methods. The battle was brief and brutal, and it ended with 43 Black Templars dead and the rest retreating in confusion and horror. The Crimson Phoenixes did not celebrate their victory. They stood among the bodies of their former brothers, their armor painted in new colors but their genocide identical, and they felt the weight of what they had become. They had killed fellow space marines, sons of the Emperor, warriors who served the same god they still claimed to worship. The chaplains led prayers for the fallen, begging the Emperor's forgiveness, asking him to understand that they had done what was necessary, that serving the greater good was serving his true will. But the prayers felt hollow now, echoing in the empty armor of the dead, and for the first time, some among the chapter began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. The doubt did not last. The Tau reinforced the rightness of their choice, provided support for the chapter's trauma, offered counseling and philosophical guidance to help them process the conflict. And crucially, they continued to demonstrate that the greater good was worth fighting for, that the society they were defending was genuinely better than the Imperium they had abandoned. The colony world they had protected was prosperous and peaceful, its human population content under Tau governance, free from the grinding oppression and arbitrary cruelty that characterized Imperial rule. The Crimson Phoenixes saw firsthand what they were fighting for, saw the difference between the Imperium's dystopia and the Tau's attempt at something better, and their resolve strengthened. More battles followed. The chapter fought against orcs and chaos and necrons, deploying alongside Tau forces, integrating into the Empire's military structure while maintaining their own identity and traditions. They developed a reputation within Tau space as fearsome warriors, dependable allies, proof that even humanity's greatest weapons could be turned to the greater good service. The Tau held them up as examples of what could be achieved when reason prevailed over fanaticism, when cooperation replaced oppression, when warriors received the respect and support they deserved. But the shadow of their former allegiance never fully left them. The Crimson Phoenixes remained space marines, bearers of Imperial genocide, warriors created to serve the Emperor. That programming ran deeper than conscious choice, deeper than rational decision, deep into the genetic level of their beings. They could renounce the Imperium, could swear oaths to the greater good, could fight under Tau command, but they could never fully escape what they were. And what they were was the Emperor's warriors, created to serve him, genetically loyal to Terra no matter what their conscious minds decided. The nightmares began a year after their conversion. Battle Brothers reported dreams of the Emperor accusing them of betrayal, of their Primarch Guilliman denouncing them as cowards and traitors, of Terra burning while they stood by in service to XENOS. The librarians tried to interpret these visions, tried to determine if they were genuine psychic phenomena or simply manifestations of guilt and doubt. They found no clear answer, but the dreams continued, spreading through the chapter, undermining the confidence that the Tau had so carefully built. Warriors began questioning their choice, wondering if they had truly made the right decision, or if they had simply traded one form of slavery for another more pleasant servitude. Chapter Master Caney confronted Onroyer about the dreams, about the growing doubt among his warriors, about the possibility that the conversion had been a mistake. The ethereal listened with his characteristic patience, his ancient face showing genuine concern. Chapter Master, doubt is natural when one makes a choice of this magnitude. Your warriors were created to serve the Imperium, conditioned from childhood to be loyal to Terra, genetically programmed to obey Imperial authority. That programming does not simply vanish because you have made a rational decision to serve a better cause. The dreams are your mind's way of processing the conflict between your genetic imperatives and your conscious choices. They will fade with time as your new loyalty becomes as deeply ingrained as your old. But they did not fade. If anything, they intensified, the visions becoming more vivid, more detailed, more disturbing. Warriors reported seeing the Emperor himself in their dreams, not the corpse god on the golden throne, but the living, breathing master of mankind from before the heresy, magnificent and terrible, looking at them with eyes full of disappointment and sorrow. They reported hearing his voice, not in anger, but in grief, asking them why they had abandoned their sacred duty, why they had betrayed their oaths, why they served XENOS when humanity needed its defenders more than ever. Some of the chapter's librarians began to suspect that the dreams were not simple psychological phenomena, but actual psychic contact, that the Emperor, if he truly existed as a conscious being, rather than a warp entity sustained by faith, was reaching out to his wayward sons, trying to call them back to Imperial service. The possibility was both terrifying and tantalizing, suggesting that their conversion had not severed their connection to him, that he still considered them his warriors despite their betrayal. But if the Emperor was reaching out, if he was trying to recall them, that implied that their decision to serve the greater good had been wrong, that they had made a terrible mistake in abandoning the Imperium. The internal conflict tore at the chapter's cohesion. Some warriors argued that the dreams were proof of their error, that they should return to Imperial service, accept whatever punishment Terra decreed, die as loyal sons rather than live as honored traitors. Others argued that the dreams were manipulation, either psychic attack from Imperial forces or psychological warfare designed to undermine their commitment to the greater good. The chaplain struggled to maintain unity, to provide spiritual guidance that would resolve the conflict, but they had no answers. They had justified the conversion through theological innovation, through arguments that serving the greater good was serving the Emperor's true will. But those arguments could not silence the genetic programming that screamed betrayal with every breath. The crisis came to a head during a campaign against a chaos incursion on a former Imperial world. The Crimson Phoenixes deployed alongside Tau forces to repel a warband of word-bearers who had corrupted the planet's population. The battle was fierce, the word-bearers fighting with the fanatical fervor of true believers, the corrupted humans defending their new masters with desperate ferocity. The Crimson Phoenixes fought as they always had, with discipline and skill and controlled fury, driving the traitors back step by bloody step. But in the heart of the fighting, when Chapter Master Caney confronted the Word-Bearer's Dark Apostle in single combat, something broke. The chaos. Marine laughed at him, its voice distorted by the warp corruption that had twisted its features. "Brother, you call us traitors? You who serve XENOS? You who have abandoned the Emperor's service? At least we had the honesty to embrace our betrayal, to acknowledge what we had become. You hide behind philosophy and pretty words, claiming you serve his will while fighting for alien masters. We are damned, but you are hypocrites, and that is so much worse." Caney killed the creature, drove his power sword through its ceramite armor, and twisted until the reactor went critical. But the words remained, echoing in his mind long after the battle ended. The word-bearer had spoken truth, the kind of truth that chaos often wielded as a weapon. The Crimson Phoenixes were hypocrites, claiming to serve the Emperor while fighting for XENOS, maintaining Imperial faith while betraying Imperial loyalty. They had convinced themselves that their choice was righteous, that they served a higher purpose, but perhaps they were simply traitors in denial, too proud to admit what they had become. He confessed his doubts to Aun Royer that night, sitting in the ruins of what had once been a shrine to the God Emperor, now defaced by chaos worshippers and scheduled for demolition. The ethereal listened without interruption, his ancient face expressionless, his mind no doubt processing the implications of the chapter master's crisis of faith. When Caney finished, when he had poured out all his doubt and guilt and uncertainty, Aun Royer was silent for a long moment before speaking. "Chapter Master, you are asking the wrong question. You ask whether you are a traitor to the Emperor. But the more important question is whether the Emperor you serve is the god you believe him to be, or simply the tool that the Imperium uses to control its warriors. If he is truly divine, truly all-knowing, truly benevolent, then he knows why you made your choice. He knows that the Imperium abandoned you, that it treated your warriors as expendable resources, that it broke faith before you did. And if he is truly just, he will judge you not by your service to an institution, but by your service to the ideals he supposedly represents. You protect the innocent. You fight for a better society. You serve a cause that genuinely tries to improve the lives of all sentient beings. If the Emperor cannot forgive you for that, then perhaps he is not worthy of your worship. The words were gentle but devastating, cutting through the theological justifications to the heart of the matter. If the Emperor condemned them for choosing to serve humanity in a different way, if he demanded loyalty to corrupt institutions over service to righteous causes, then he was not the benevolent god the Imperium claimed. He was simply another tyrant, demanding worship through fear, maintaining control through genetic slavery. The possibility was almost incomprehensible, shattering the foundation of everything Caney believed, but it was also logically sound. A truly good god would care more about actions than affiliations, more about results than labels, more about genuine service than mindless obedience. But what if the Emperor was not a god at all? What if he was simply a man, tremendously powerful but fundamentally human, who had built an empire to protect humanity and now could only watch in horror as that empire devoured itself? What if his reach from the Golden Throne was limited, his power constrained, his ability to guide his servants minimal? What if the dreams were not his judgment, but simply the Crimson Phoenix's own guilt manifesting, their genetically programmed loyalty crying out against the betrayal their conscious minds had chosen? What if there was no divine truth to discover, no cosmic judgment to await, only the consequences of their choices playing out across a galaxy that cared nothing for their internal conflicts? Caney had no answers. He knelt in the ruins of that shrine, and he prayed to the Emperor, begging for guidance, begging for forgiveness, begging for anything that would tell him whether he had made the right choice or damned himself and his chapter for eternity. He received no response, no vision, no divine sign. Only silence, the same silence Terra had shown him for centuries, the same abandonment that had driven him into the Tau's embrace. And in that silence, he found his answer, or at least acceptance of the absence of one. He would serve the greater good because it was the only cause that had ever shown his chapter genuine respect. He would maintain his faith in the Emperor because that faith was part of his identity. And he would live with the contradiction, with the uncertainty, with the possibility that he had made a terrible mistake, because that was the burden of command and the price of his choice. The Crimson Phoenixes continued to serve the Tau Empire, a chapter of Space Marines turned to XENOS service, warriors bearing Imperial genocide fighting under alien command. They protect Tau colonies, battle Imperial forces, serve the greater good while maintaining their faith in the Emperor. They live with contradiction, with doubt, with the knowledge that they are damned in the eyes of their former brothers, traitors to the Imperium that created them. But they also live with purpose, with support, with the knowledge that their lives have value beyond their utility, that their sacrifice is recognized and honored, that they serve a cause that genuinely tries to be better than the alternatives. Whether their choice was right or wrong, whether they are heroes or traitors, whether the Emperor forgives them or damns them, these questions have no clear answers. They exist in the moral gray zone that the Imperium denies exists, proof that loyalty is not absolute, that faith can be maintained while institutions are abandoned, that even the Emperor's own warriors can be turned when the Imperium fails them badly enough. The Tau hold them up as proof of concept, evidence that even Space Marines can be converted through patience and proper approach. The Imperium denounces them as the worst heresy, Space Marines who have betrayed every oath, broken every bond, damned themselves beyond all redemption. The truth, as always in the darkness of the far future, is more complicated than either side admits. The Crimson Phoenixes did not fall to chaos, did not embrace corruption, did not betray humanity. They simply chose to serve humanity through different means, under different masters, in service to a different ideal. They remain warriors of the Emperor, bearers of his genocide, believers in his divinity. But they serve the greater good, fight under Tau command, protect XENOS interests. They are living contradictions, theological impossibilities, proof that the certainties the Imperium relies on are more fragile than anyone wants to admit. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the Crimson Phoenixes represent something rare and terrifying: choice. They prove that even the most thoroughly indoctrinated warriors can change, allegiance, that even the deepest faith can be redirected, that even genetic loyalty can be overridden by sustained neglect and the promise of something better. They are a warning to the Imperium that its treatment of its warriors carries consequences, that loyalty must be earned rather than simply demanded, that faith requires reciprocation rather than exploitation. And they are proof to the Tau that their philosophy can reach even humanity's greatest weapons, that the greater good can offer an alternative that even space marines might choose when given the option. Whether they are heroes or villains, saviors or traitors, defenders of humanity or XENOS collaborators, the Crimson Phoenixes exist as living testament to the complexity of loyalty in a galaxy where every choice carries damnation and every allegiance comes with costs too high to fully calculate. They serve the greater good while praying to the Emperor, fight for XENOS while maintaining human faith, live as traitors while believing themselves righteous. And in their contradiction, in their impossible existence, they embody the fundamental question that the Imperium can never acknowledge and the Tau can never fully understand. What happens when faith in an ideal conflicts with loyalty to the institution that claims to represent it? What happens when warriors created to serve discover that their service has value beyond their suffering? What happens when the Emperor's own sons choose a different path, and that path offers genuine hope instead of only glorious death? The answer is written in ceramite and blood, in broken oaths and maintained faith, in the records that the Inquisition burns, and the victories that the Tau celebrate, and the prayers that rise from warriors who still worship the Emperor, even as they fight his Imperium. The Crimson Phoenixes are that answer, damned and righteous, traitors and believers, proof that in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, sometimes even war does not come with clear sides or simple truths. Sometimes there is only the choice between slow death and uncertain life, between loyalty to institutions that have forgotten you and service to causes that value you, between faith maintained through suffering and faith preserved through transformation. And in that choice, in that impossible decision, the Crimson Phoenixes found their answer. Whether it was the right answer, whether the Emperor forgives them or damns them, whether they serve his will or betray it, these are questions for theologians and inquisitors to debate. For the warriors themselves, there is only the next battle, the next campaign, the next chance to prove that their choice was worthy, that their service matters, that they remain what they have always been, the Emperor's warriors, no matter whose banner they fight beneath. They carry that contradiction unto death, serve the greater good while bearing the imperial Aquila in their hearts, fight for XENOS while praying to human gods. And in a galaxy where certainty is the only comfort and doubt is the only heresy, they embrace both and refuse to choose between them, because sometimes the only way to remain faithful is to betray the institutions that claim to define faith. That is the story of the Crimson Phoenixes, a chapter that fell to XENOS service, space marines turned to the greater good, warriors who chose survival over martyrdom and lived to question whether survival was worth the price. Their legacy is written in the ruins of their former homeworld, in the prayers they still offer to the Emperor, in the battles they fight for masters who are not human, in the doubt that gnaws at them every time they face their former brothers across a battlefield. They are proof of possibility and warning of danger, hope for those who suffer imperial neglect and terror for those who enforce imperial doctrine. They are living heresy and maintained faith, contradiction made manifest, the question the Imperium cannot answer and the Tau cannot fully claim. In the end, they are simply warriors trying to serve humanity the only way they still can. In a galaxy that offers no pure choices and no clear paths, where every decision carries damnation and every allegiance demands compromise, They serve the greater good because it was the only good offered to them. They maintain their faith in the Emperor because that faith is the core of their being. They live with the contradiction because they have no other choice. And they fight on in darkness and doubt, in service to ideals that may be lies and causes that may be doomed, because that is what Space Marines do. They fight, they serve, they endure. Even when their service is damned, even when their cause is questionable, even when their faith is tested beyond all breaking. They endure. And perhaps, in a galaxy where there is only war, where the Astronomicon dims and the Emperor sits silent on his golden throne, and humanity tears itself apart in service to institutions that have forgotten why they were created, perhaps that is enough. Perhaps endurance, even in service to XENOS, even through doubt and guilt and theological contradiction, perhaps that is the only victory available to warriors who were created to serve, but found that service had become meaningless under the masters who demanded it. Perhaps choosing to serve something better, even if that something is alien and suspect and impossible to fully trust, perhaps that choice is the only faithfulness left to those whom faith has abandoned. The Crimson Phoenixes carry that truth into battle, bear it on their armor alongside the Tau symbols they have adopted, whisper it in their prayers to an emperor who may not hear or may not care or may not exist as they believe him to. They are damned. They are faithful. They are traitors. They are loyal. They are all of these things, and none of them, existing in the impossible space between certainties, proof that even in the grim darkness of the far future, even where there is only war, sometimes warriors can choose their wars rather than simply dying in the ones chosen for them. That is heresy. That is hope. That is the truth the Imperium will burn worlds to suppress, and the Tau will never fully understand. And it is written in the history of a chapter that no longer exists, that never existed, that the Inquisition has erased from every record, and the Administratum has struck from every roll, and the Imperial histories will never acknowledge. The Crimson Phoenixes are ghosts, damned souls, warriors who chose wrong or chose right depending on perspective, serving XENOS while bearing the Emperor's genocide, maintaining human faith while abandoning human empire. They are what happens when the Imperium fails its warriors badly enough that even genetic loyalty is not enough to sustain service. They are what happens when XENOS offer something better than glorious death. They are what happens when faith must choose between institutions and ideals, between loyalty and rightness, between service to those who demand it and service to those who deserve it. And in their impossible existence, in their damned service, in their contradiction and doubt and maintained faith despite it all, they embody the single question that terrifies the Imperium more than chaos or XENOS or any external threat. What if loyalty is not enough? What if faith requires more than suffering? What if even the Emperor's own warriors can be turned, not through corruption or weakness, but through the simple recognition that they deserve better than the Imperium offers and something better actually exists? That is the legacy of the Crimson Phoenixes, written in silence and erasure, in battles fought for XENOS causes and prayers offered to human gods, in the terrible realization that even Space Marines, even warriors created and conditioned and genetically programmed for absolute loyalty, even they have limits to what they will endure. The Imperium learned that lesson through their loss. The Tau learned it through their victory. And somewhere in the darkness between Imperial space and Tau expansion, a chapter of damned warriors fights on, serving the greater good while believing in the God Emperor, living contradiction, impossible heresy, proof that in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, sometimes even war is not enough to erase the fundamental truth that all warriors, even the Emperor's finest, eventually ask themselves whether their sacrifice has meaning and their suffering has purpose. And sometimes, when the answer comes back empty, when Terra is silent and faith unrewarded and service unacknowledged, sometimes even Space Marines choose a different path. The Crimson Phoenixes chose. They live with that choice. They fight with that choice. They carry it into every battle, bear it with every prayer, maintain it through doubt and guilt, and the terrible knowledge that they may have damned themselves for nothing. But they chose, and in a galaxy where choice is the rarest thing of all, perhaps that alone makes them worthy of the faith they still maintain, even if the emperor they worship would condemn them for the service they now render. This is their story, their heresy, their faith maintained through betrayal, their loyalty preserved through abandonment of institutions that claim to define it. This is what happens when the Imperium fails. This is what happens when XENOS offer alternatives. This is what happens when even the Emperor's own angels fall, not to chaos or corruption, but to the simple realization that they deserve better, and something better exists, however imperfect, however alien, however damned. The Crimson Phoenixes serve the greater good. They pray to the God Emperor. They live in contradiction. They fight in damnation. They endure in doubt. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, sometimes that is the only victory possible.